Test 1 2 3. Test 1 2 3. Good morning. Test.
You all right? Guess that was a little aggressive. Hey, good morning, everybody. I really appreciate you coming here. The subcommittee will come to order. It's very good to see you here again, and I'm glad that you're here. I'd like to preface this, as I do with everything. This committee is not a bipartisan committee. It is a nonpartisan committee. And if anybody gets out of line on either side of this aisle, I will bring them back in because we're just not doing that. We're just not. So that is for the record. And we got our gear working this time, right, Mr. Garcia? Okay, I tell you what, we had some issues. And I don't mean you, I mean me and these guys. So it's good. It's a pleasure to have you all here. And over the last 4 years, the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity has passed legislation that has greatly improved the veterans' access to their GI benefits, which are earned, not given, and has protected them from fraud and other outside factors. And much of this legislation was passed under the leadership of my friend and colleague, Mr. Levin. And I appreciate the ranking member and his staff for continuing to work with us in a nonpartisan way as we continue to work with improving the VA system, our subcommittee has jurisdiction over. Today, our subcommittee comes together to examine the state of the GI Bill and the Education Service. Let me make it clear, I believe this, Mr. Garcia, that your intentions are pure, and your staff and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and I have a very good but somewhat complicated political relationship, as you do. But I do believe that the Secretary's intentions are pure. I absolutely know that my ranking member's intentions are pure, along with the rest of these folks. So the sole stated intent and our purpose here today is to make sure that our veterans have the best possible access, seamless, to these educational benefits. So let's lock arms and march together. So last year, though, however, the subcommittee has also seen you guys get in the way of yourself and making it harder for our veterans to access their earned benefits, and that is an issue. So that's what we're here to talk about today. Last Congress, the House and Senate had to pass an emergency legislative fix for the 85-15 rule because you had altered your interpretation of the statute without telling the schools or Congress. If a fix had not been made, thousands of GI Bill students would not have gotten their benefits. And earlier this year, our committee sent a letter to the Secretary asking for a delay of the release of the enrollment manager because the VA decided to implement it at the beginning of the semester when the majority of schools certify student veterans. We've heard additional concerns from the veterans and schools about the VA, how the VA interprets Section 1015 waiver authority, and the VA's lack of communication with school certifying officials. This has become a pattern of behavior with the VBA, and it's increasingly frustrating to us and the schools and the veterans. VA's most recent example of getting in the way of itself is the risk-based surveys. Congress intended for risk-based surveys to be used when the VA and the state approving agencies believe there is an issue with concern. I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. We screwed this up. I'm using the royal we because I've been in Congress for 5 minutes. But we had really good intentions, and how we communicated them to you is just wrong. We set parameters. They're not good. They're not reasonable. They're not realistic. And so we're taking that one on the chin. Time to do some truth-telling, right? Unfortunately, you guys have mandated a certain number of risk-based surveys to be performed regardless of whether there is an issue with the number of schools. At that number of schools, this is completely unnecessary red tape and not at all the intent of the law when it was passed. Risk-based surveys were intended to be used as a tool to review schools providing questionable services to veterans and hold them accountable to the veterans they serve. And I believe that the VA generally has done good work in the education space. There are many success stories in this area, and we applaud everyone for their work that have done to achieve the ability of our veterans to get education. However, we're going to hold you guys to the highest standard. That's just it, as you try to do yourself. And Congress should not have to continuously be called to intervene in your administration of educational benefits, especially when the number of education services staff has risen from 75 at the implementation of the post-9/11 GI Bill to 231 today. With more people working at the VA today, there should be a better level of service. Once again, I am very thankful that you're here today, and I'm looking forward to getting this done. So with that, I yield to the ranking member for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you all being here. Oftentimes, government regulations are written after misconduct and negligence lead to disastrous consequences. For our subcommittee, those consequences are usually wasted taxpayer dollars and broken promises to our veterans. I'm proud that we've responded by establishing strong policies to prevent similar abuses in the future. To be clear, I think there are legitimate complaints regarding the way VA has implemented some policies, and we're here today to ask VA to refine some things. However, we're talking about refining process, not rolling back underlying protections for veterans. These protections were hard-won after decades of fly-by-night predatory schools targeting veterans for their earned benefits. It's critical that this subcommittee and VA continue to police bad actors because the GI Bill is a transition benefit. It's a key component of reintegrating service members into civil society and closing the opportunity gaps with their peers who didn't serve. That being said, I have real concerns about how VA is implementing risk-based surveys, and I can empathize with the frustration coming from schools. Hope to learn more from VA today on how the department plans to move forward with these protections and utilize risk factors to prioritize reviewing potential bad actors targeting veterans and their earned benefits. Congressional intent was that risk-based surveys should be used when schools have grossly failed at one of the standards in law, not that they should duplicate compliance surveys. I also look forward to hearing from our partners from the state approving agencies, the schools, the VSO community, and the program administrators. See, some of them are already here. Glad you all could join us today. Thank you for the work that you do and for the direct impact you have on veterans and their families. The feedback from the people you all represent will help us review and refine GI Bill processes as we focus on serving veterans and protecting their earned benefits. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, just want to say I'm excited to come to Wisconsin to join you for a field hearing in the coming months. I hope the weather is as good in Wisconsin as it was in San Diego when you came to visit us a few months ago.
The chances of that are zero.
With that, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Levin. I'll now introduce our witness panel. Our first witness is Mr. Joseph Garcia, the Executive Director of Education Services at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Mr. Garcia is accompanied by Mr. James Ruhlman, the Deputy Director of Program Management at Education Services. And our second witness is Mr. Joseph Westcott, the Legislative Director for the National Association of State Approving Agencies. I will ask the witnesses to please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Very well. Thank you, and let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Mr. Garcia, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your testimony on behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Good morning, Chairman Van Orden, Ranking Member Levin, and other members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss VA's education benefit programs. With me today is James Ruhlman, Deputy Director of Program Management at Education Service. Today I will highlight VA's partnership with the state approving agencies, SAAs, and the National Association of State Approving Agencies, NASA, to provide program oversight, which is more important than ever before. There are more schools, more training programs, and more options for students. As part of our oversight efforts, VA works in collaboration with SAAs to perform risk-based surveys. Risk-based surveys have three principal objectives. First, they provide a mechanism for SAAs to review and mitigate potential fraud, waste, and abuse by using data and risk factors that are outside of the normal program approval and compliance survey process. Second, RBSs allow the SAAs to verify the propriety of benefits paid to education and training institutions under the provisions of the laws administered by VA. Third, if risks are confirmed, corrective action is promptly initiated. These surveys are an important tool in ensuring that institutions are meeting and maintaining VA's approval requirements. The FY23 cooperative agreements between VA and SAAs requires the completion of 1,308 RBSs. As of September 13, 2023, 1,195 have been conducted. Due to the RBS findings, 55 educational and training institutions have been withdrawn from GI Bill participating in the program. VA has worked with NASA to adjust RBS thresholds and revise the standard operating procedures, guide, and worksheets for FY24. Improvements in the RBS process are ongoing. An RBS work group was formed by NASA and Education Service leadership to discuss best practices, gaps, and other areas of concern. The work group remains committed to continual improvement, refining the RBS model, guidance, and tools based on SAA feedback and data-driven findings. I'd like to take the opportunity to also highlight VA's ongoing focus on employment opportunities for veterans. The Veterans Employment Through Technology Education Courses, or VETTech program, provide participants computer training through select providers to advance careers in high technology industry. Due to high demand, allocated funds tend to run out before the end of the fiscal year. However, as participants exit the program for various reasons, funds are deobligated and become available for new enrollments. Past practice was to wait for the upcoming fiscal year to start new enrollment. However, the program is entering its final year of the 5-year pilot. VA wanted to ensure as many veterans as possible had the opportunity to train through this program. As such, VA developed and executed a plan and outreach campaign to allow new VETTech participants to enroll through the use of the deobligated funds. In a matter of days, VA received over 6,000 new applications and over 300 participants are now enrolled. These numbers exceed what typically occurs in a month, and over $6 million of the $13 million that was deobligated has been reallocated. Average salary for the VETTech graduates is $66,000, employment secured in an average of 57 days. The success of this initiative is proof of the importance of keeping the veterans first in mind. As a final point, I'd like to express our thanks to NASA and our SAA partners. Their ongoing commitment ensures accurate and timely delivery of high-quality educational benefits to veterans and their families. Mr. Chairman, VA looks forward to continued opportunities of working with Congress to provide the best possible GI Bill experience for our veterans. This concludes my testimony. My colleague and I look forward to answering any questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. The written statement of Mr. Garcia will be entered into the hearing record. Mr. Westcott, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your testimony.
Chairman Van Orden, Ranking Member Levin, and members of the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity, I am pleased to appear before you today on behalf of the 52 member state agencies of the National Association of State Approving Agencies. I appreciate the opportunity to provide comments to this committee pertaining to the impact of bureaucratic red tape on veterans' education benefits. I'm accompanied today by NASA President Frank Myers. Today, 52 SAs in 49 states, as well as the District of Columbia and the Territory of Puerto Rico, composed of only 215 personnel, are supervising over 13,000 active facilities and nearly 220,000 programs. SAs work in collaboration with the VA and our other partners, such as NAVPA, to promote and safeguard quality education and training programs for veterans and to assist the VA in preventing fraud, waste, and abuse. NASA believes the primary responsibility and focus of the SAs is and should continue to be to review, evaluate, and approve programs at schools and training facilities utilizing state and federal criteria. We do this through an approval process that allows us to carefully evaluate many factors, including curriculum, instructors, and the facilities themselves. We take this responsibility seriously and consider ourselves the gatekeepers of quality by ensuring only quality programs are approved. Congress, rightly concerned that inadequate oversight allowed some bad actors to prey on veterans and too often closed their doors with little warning, included in the Comey Act of 2017 provisions that for the first time allowed SAs to perform risk-based survey. NASA, emboldened by congressional action and recognizing that compliance surveys alone could not address quality and risk, approached the Lumina Foundation in the summer of 2019 for a grant to provide funding to develop and test an oversight model. The end result was a model that looked at meaningful metrics, was programmatic in application, and most importantly, veteran-centric. In other words, the model could determine if schools were offering quality programs which kept the promise of better jobs and opportunities. The key to the model's success was that it allowed SAAs to focus their risk-based survey visits on those institutions most likely to present risk. This is why a searchable and comprehensive database that SAAs can access was and still is absolutely necessary for success. State-approving agencies are adamant that only approving quality programs that provide good jobs and a better future for our veterans and their families. Unfortunately, in recent years, VA interpretation of certain laws have resulted in requirements that led to some schools deciding to withdraw from the GI Bill program or being unable to participate. An example of this is requiring accredited institutions to offer Title IV funding. Unfortunately, the requirement as interpreted and written has resulted in numerous seminary, pastoral, and religious training programs, as well as several medical training programs being withdrawn due to a situation where accredited facilities are unable to participate in the program, but non-accredited ones are. Likewise, the VA's interpretation that all institutions, including small NCDs, apprenticeships, and OJTs, must undergo hours of certification training and provide their personal Social Security numbers to gain access to the new VA certification software has resulted in quality training establishments requesting to be withdrawn. In the past year, largely due to the leadership of Director Garcia, communications between the VA and state-approving agencies have improved markedly. Likewise, we sense a renewed commitment to partnership. However, if we are to be successful in assuring the long-term success of the GI Bill educational program, there must be a renewed commitment to this historic state and federal partnership. Mr. Chairman, today SAAs throughout this great nation are diligently working with our VA partners, VSO stakeholders, and educational institutions to protect the quality and integrity of the GI Bill and to ensure that our veterans and their families have unfettered access to quality training and educational programs. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to answering any questions that your committee members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Westcott. The written testimony or statement of Mr. Westcott will be entered into the hearing record. We're now going to proceed to questioning. You're going to see that clock in front of you. I see the same thing, and I'm not going to ask you. I'm going to tell you that's 5 minutes is 5 minutes. That's for me too. So I will now the chair will now recognize himself for 5 minutes. That's me. Mr. Garcia, Mr. Westcott has brought up a very salient point in that we seem to be having a declining number of schools participating in this program, and in the stated goal of this program and your job and mine and all of ours up here is to make sure we have well-educated veterans. So can you like spitball how many schools have self-selected out of this program recently?
Sure, I believe what Mr. Westcott is referring to is Enrollment Manager, which was a release as part of Digital GI Bill in March of 2023. And we were very proactive with the customer experience group to assist all schools, and it was very well received by the schools in the transition. We want to do more things permanently like that going in the future. But it is a requirement to use ID.me, login.gov for credentials to protect that information for both the school certifying official and the school. We have partnered and listened to NASA. We've made an exception for 90 days to accept paper for OJT and apprentice programs because they may have issues getting in. So we continue to work with them. We'll reassess that after October 31st to see what needs to be done, but we are providing training for them.
Mr. Garcia, I understand. Are there more schools now participating in this program than there were previously? Are there more or less? There's less. So listen, man. Regulations and programs are designed to make things better and more fluid and easier so you can accomplish a task. And if the regulation is getting in the way of accomplishing a mission, then the regulation needs to be looked at. It's pretty simple. You guys have implemented you guys have implemented a quota system. This is correct. So certain schools will have to do X amount of these risk-based surveys, right? Like school X has to do 10 of these, and you assign that number. Is that correct?
So we assign assignments of risk-based surveys and other supervisory visits to the states. Yes, sir. That's being finalized now. That'll go out effective 1 October.
I get it. So you're in the service. I respect your service, Mr. Garcia. You know that you send troops out to the pumpkin patch and you say, bring me back 10 pumpkins. They're bringing back 10 pumpkins. If you tell them to go out and pick pumpkins, they're going to come back with 100, right? So my concern with establishing quotas is this. If you say school X has to do 10 of these risk-based surveys, they're doing 10, when in fact they may only have to do 9, or they should be doing 11. And when you artificially impose these things on these different groups that have, you know, the real touch with their students and they understand the vibe that's going on there, I think that we are not serving our veterans well, because we're either putting on too much an administrative burden on these institutions, or on the other side, we're not making sure that we're preventing as much fraud as possible. So I'm going to ask you to really rethink what you're doing and have a much more open line of communications with these schools concerning the risk-based surveys. And we had the chance to talk about how these are implemented, and you know, you got 24 hours to do this and that, and I want to continue to engage with you and your staff and the schools to make sure that we work this out appropriately. Yes. And Mr. Westcott, I have 1 minute, 9 seconds. In your testimony, you indicated that NASA and the Education Council undertook the pilot designed by convening an advisory council of 22 members representing student veterans, state approving agencies, schools, accreditors, states, and other experts. And you also stated that the advisory council members developed a model of oversight. Did the VA utilize this model that you developed, or some of its tenet, in developing the risk-based surveys, to your knowledge?
They did not utilize the model as we developed it. Over the course of a year, they revised many elements within the model. And of course, we did not get a database, which is critical, as I said earlier, to implementing that model. You know, and that's been a personal concern of mine, because I was in this from the beginning.
So you guys did a whole bunch of work, compiled a whole bunch of stuff, you gave it to some people, and they didn't act on it.
Well, we gave them a finished product, basically.
Okay.
That worked, that we had data, that we'd proven had worked.
Very well. Let's try that again. With that, my time has expired. I now recognize Ranking Member Levin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Garcia, the Isaacson-Rowe Act set forth 8 factors that would prompt a risk-based survey. Can you explain how VA is utilizing those 8 factors?
Yes, sir, and 2 of those would trigger a risk-based survey.
Could you explain, or repeat the question, could you explain how VA is utilizing those 8 factors?
Yes, sir, so like you say, they're identified, and then based on the model and what looks like a potential risk association with the school, then if 2 of those factors are triggered, again, things like rapid increase in veteran enrollment, 90-10 violation, 85-15, there's a list that you know of. If at least 2 of those factors are identified or triggered, then that would be a risk-based survey.
Got it. So you brought up rapid increase in enrollment. Has VA selected the school with the largest enrollment increase over the last year?
Sir, I'm not sure how the numbers play out, but you're right. We don't want to have a school that went from 4 to 8, right? And that's a rapid increase of over 30%, the same as a larger school that had a 35% increase. So we evaluate based on that information.
But it would follow that if you're using the factors in Isaacson-Rowe that you would have, in fact, reviewed that school?
We would have looked at the information to start, but then there's judgment by the SAAs to determine if, in fact, that school is visited. So to me, there'd be some qualitative data to assess.
Okay, maybe you can take that question back and figure it out. Isaacson Rowe also set forth the requirement that educational programs need to either participate in the Department of Education Title IV programs or receive a waiver from VA. How does that waiver process work?
Yes, sir. So, as you know, we want Title IV and GI Bill delivery benefits to be used, right? Because if not, then the veteran doesn't have access to federal loans, federal grants, that kind of thing. If they don't have access to Title IV, it might be more expensive private loans. And so we would grant a waiver if the school could not participate for whatever reason in Title IV. That would generate a waiver. We wouldn't generate a waiver just because the school doesn't want to. Okay, that's the difference.
Mr. Westcott, can I get your input on the waiver process, how you think it's going?
Well, I, of course, disagree with that. I think that SAs, when we approve programs, are very careful to make sure that those programs are quality. I'll give you a quick example, sir, and that is in North Carolina, we had to withdraw Reformed Theological Seminary because they simply did not wish to, be involved with Title IV. A fine seminary, a seminary that had been approved for many years, there was no reason for that to be the case, and there should have been a waiver granted.
Mr. Garcia, I'll turn back to you. We've heard concerns from schools regarding a lack of transparency with the process by which complaints submitted via the GI Bill school feedback tool are posted to the GI Bill comparison tool. First, the statute requires VA to publish, and I quote, only feedback that conforms with criteria for relevancy that the Secretary shall determine, end quote. Can you please describe this internal review process and, most importantly, who is responsible?
Yes, sir. So the complaints are reviewed and validated before they're submitted for the comparison tool. That is something that, in fact, James' section, Mr. Ruman's section, looks at, and then they're provided to another section that actually uploads them. If there is an error or mistake, and that could happen, I've gotten emails from a school that says, hey, looks like that was posted erroneously. We deal with it and take it down if necessary, so we're open to if something like that occurred by mistake.
And who's responsible?
I'd say I'm responsible.
You're responsible. Okay, good. Second, the statute requires VA to allow schools, and I quote, to verify feedback and address issues regarding feedback before the feedback is published, end quote. Same question. What's the process and who's responsible? And you're responsible? All right, that's good to know. You heard it here. Another question for you with the time I have left. Schools are given just a few days to prepare for risk-based surveys. Is this an appropriate timeline? Should the timeline be the same for all risk-based surveys, or should higher risk or lower risk cases change the timeline?
So there's a different timeline across the compliance surveys, risk-based surveys, and targeted risk-based surveys. Targeted risk-based surveys, there's a known issue there, and that's the one that could be 1 day or less. I think there's legislation to make it 2 days, but they're quick notice on a targeted risk-based surveys where there's known issues to address.
Thanks for your time. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Levin. The chair now recognizes Mr. Franklin from the great state of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Appreciate you holding the hearing today. Thank you, gentlemen, for spending time with us this morning. Kind of reiterating what they had stated in opening comments. This is about veterans. This is about how to improve the product that we deliver. We're all inside this room deliberating it today, but this is all about those who aren't in the room, so we keep that in mind. And, we will often put in bureaucratic measures with good reason, but over time, it's inevitable you need, at a minimum, course corrections, and sometimes if there are problems, we need to really take a deeper look at those. Kind of piggybacking on that last question, I did want to ask Mr. Garcia, the risk-based surveys, my understanding, are limited to only providing 1 business day's notice. Is that correct, as it stands now?
Sir, that's on targeted risk-based surveys.
Targeted risk, okay.
Yes, sir.
And the idea there, I guess, is the suspicion is they're doing something wrong. You don't want to have them cover their tracks, so you want to catch them in the act.
Yes, sir.
Okay. How many of the risk-based surveys that you've done, how many did you say you've done so far this year?
So close to 1,200.
How many of those are targeted versus just routine RBSs?
So targeted risk-based surveys, about 167 have been completed.
Okay.
Versus the roughly 1,200 for the risk-based surveys.
Okay, but even the rest of those still have a day's notice for an RBS?
They should have more days notice than an RBS, not the target risk-based surveys.
Okay, And so, Mr. Westcott, how many typically do you see for just a routine risk-based survey?
Well, I can tell you, sir, when we built that model, it was at least 30 days. Because the idea was that they would send us the information that we would review, advertising, financial stability, and those things prior to us getting on site, so that when we got on site, we could look at things and talk to veterans that were necessary.
So in practice, though, are they getting 30 days?
I'm sorry.
You said when designed, it was supposed to give 30 days, but in practice, is that what routine risk-based surveys are getting now, 30 days?
Sadly, they are sometimes less than that.
Like how much less?
20 something.
I mean, because really an institution, any organization that's not anticipating this basically has to stop in their tracks and accommodate that. So that's,
It should be 30 days.
should be, okay. So the 2023 cooperative agreement says that VA and SAAs must complete 1,308 RBSs. That's a very specific number. Mr. Garcia, can you tell me how you arrive at that specific a number?
Yes, sir. Every year, we look at, again, the risk factors, the database that shows past risk-based surveys to kind of predict what we're going to look at next year. I will say that for '24, we're looking at about a 40% drop in risk-based surveys compared to the previous year. And we're looking at things like a supervisory visit, a 2-for-1 ratio. So if you do 2 supervisory visits, that would count as a risk-based survey. So we're working to try and determine what the optimal number is.
So that actually leads me into another question. We've gotten some feedback that from those who are getting these inspections, these surveys, that oftentimes they feel that it really should be a compliance inspection, but instead the RBSs are being used instead. Would you agree with that? And if we're changing the system now, are we changing because the system's so much better out there, or are you just overstaffed and overworked and let's just conveniently cut the target?
So by statute, VA has to do the compliance survey every 2 years for a school that has more than 20, right? So that's by statute, we have to do the compliance survey. And then, of course, the new statute, as it's in row, mandates risk-based surveys either for a reactive notice of action, government action, right, that would prompt a survey, or again, the proactive approach around the risk factors that might lead to a potential fraud, waste, and abuse or situation like that.
Okay. Mr. Westcott, of those who have dropped out in your experience, how frequently is it that someone drops out who's been subjected to one of these RBSs that really didn't find any major compliance issues, but they dropped out anyway?
We often lose schools due because scheduling, having compliance and risk-based survey coming in too close together, those egregious administrative requirements. I can get you that number, sir, and I will, but it's not a large number. But I can tell you, I did find, we only have 2 weeks now to notify schools. We need to double that on risk-based surveys.
Okay. All right. I think that'd be fair. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin. I now recognize my dear friend, Ms. Ramirez from the great state of Illinois.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding today's hearing. I also want to thank the witnesses for joining us today to talk about a critical issue, which is education and how we protect and we deliver on our promise of quality education for our veterans. Over the past several months, this subcommittee has convened on multiple occasions to discuss how vital education is for our veterans adapting to their life after service. And I believe that education is one of the many pathways towards self-improvement, self-sufficiency, and provides communities the opportunity to better live their lives economically, socially, and professionally. That's why it's essential that when schools are being evaluated, the systems and processes in place are intentional about targeting bad actors, like these for-profit colleges that see student veterans as a way to pad their pockets rather than seeing them as people, members of our community with dreams and aspirations. It's why I'm so proud of my bill, H.R. 1767, the Student Veteran Benefits Restoration Act, that passed through this committee with bipartisan support a couple of months ago. This bill will restore the GI education benefits for student veterans who are wrongfully defrauded by for-profit schools. And while my legislation, if signed into law, will provide relief for many veterans, we still have to get to the root of the issue. As part of providing student veterans a quality education, I want to ask a couple of questions regarding the complaints. Mr. Garcia, can the VA explain why information about schools that have closed or lost approval disappears from the comparison tool without explanation? And then the follow-up to that would be, what steps are you taking to correct the issue?
Yes, ma'am. On the comparison tool question, as far as impact on a school that might have withdrawn from GI Bill benefits, participation, I'll have to take that back to find that out. I can take that for the record.
So you'll go ahead and take back the question about why information about schools that have been closed disappear from the comparison tool. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, well, I guess a follow-up to that is how does the VA plan to provide prospective student veterans with access to a school's history of complaints? And I particularly am interested in knowing, especially for information that has hit beyond those most recent 2 years, which is obviously crucial for them making an informed decision.
Yes, ma'am. So the comparison tool, I think, currently tracks 2 years. And so there has been a request to have more years, 7, 10 years of information. Coming from a higher education background myself, before taking this job at 3 different colleges, universities, I think we should take a look at that. Because if it goes back that far, let's say 10 years, for example, all complaints I've heard as a recommendation, could that not potentially hurt the veteran because that's old, dated complaints that have been resolved? I think we need to look at both sides of that.
What would you say would be the right number of years?
I like 2 years because I think that's fairly current. Presidents and administrations turnover, that's my experience. So if you had something that's 10 years old and that was a problem, it's likely that that administration changed over. So I think we need to be careful that you're hurting the veteran by having a complaint that have probably been addressed.
So when a student is looking into the schools and they're looking at complaints, is it easy for them to be able to access information that determines that these issues have been resolved, therefore making it easier for them to make a decision if this is the right kind of school for them to go to?
I think that's part of it, right? So the comparison tool shows a lot of information about what's offered, yellow ribbon, just not only the complaints that are part of the comparison tool, side by side in terms of tuition and fees and graduation rates. That information comes over from the Department of Education. So it's more than just complaints that I think a prospective student would look at.
A good summary of the school. Yeah. So let me ask you now another question, which is a little different, but this is in regards to non-student complaints. Has the VA received anonymous or non-student complaints against the school? And if it has, how are these handled?
What kind of complaint, ma'am?
A non-student complaint. So anonymous or non-student complaint against the school. You know, this is not a student, perhaps it is a parent or a friend or someone that had some interaction with the school.
In other words, it could be anonymous, right?
Correct.
I can answer that question, Congresswoman. We can and do accept both anonymous complaints as well as complaints from third parties against schools, and we do forward.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
I'll follow up with you. Thank you, Chairman.
Absolutely. I now recognize my friend, Mr. Mervan from the great state of Indiana for 5 minutes.
Mr. Westcott, one of the concerns you raised in your testimony is the increased administrative burden placed on school certifying officials. How much is each individual utilizing the GI Bill benefits worth to a school?
Wow. I'm not sure that I can give you that exact figure, sir, but I can tell you it's a very valuable benefit, especially underneath Chapter 33. I mean, that's basically tuition and fees. You're talking about 1,000 plus, for living, basic housing allowance or basic living allowance. You're talking about 1,000 for books. It's great for the school when you sign up a veteran under Chapter 33 or 35.
If that's the case, there's a revenue benefit. Why do schools not employ more certifying officials?
Well, and I'm glad you bring that up, sir, because it's a concern of ours as well. And SAs have gotten involved in that in the past. And on the next panel, my friend, the president of NAPA, will bring some information about that. The bottom line is lack of understanding sometimes of the true benefit of veterans you know, who's the president. You know, there should be at least a school certifying official for, 100 veterans or something, 200. I don't know, we've done surveys, but the bottom line is, I don't understand why they don't engage more.
Okay, thank you. And then the follow-up, if you could finish the answer for my colleague's question.
Yes, thank you. We do accept anonymous and third-party complaints. Those are not published to the GI Bill comparison tool. One of the things that we do generally is ensure that the individual was attending a school. So really, that's more of an informational type thing. However, we do share that information with our federal agency partners who can also search our data as well as data from other federal agencies that is submitted to the Federal Trade Commission Consumer Sentinel database. So we do accept that and we do share that. However, if we can't validate that someone was a student, then there's really no way to identify or validate or remediate it.
Very quickly, what do you believe are the majority of the anonymous complaints?
I do not know off the top of my head. We would have to research that. Anonymous complaints tend to be a small portion of what we receive.
Okay. So I'm going to give a hypothetical in this instance. A CDL school in Indiana is charging 4 times the amount for a GI participant than they would charge for a regular participant. Does that fall under the fraud, waste, and abuse category, or are there exceptions to higher costs? Because this has been brought to my attention. Same CDL license, 4 to 5 times the cost for a veteran GI Bill, and if someone off the street who does not have the GI Bill pays significantly less. Where does that fall, and how is that investigated?
Thank you for that question. That would be illegal. The law does require that program charges are the same for both GI Bill beneficiaries as well as non-GI Bill beneficiaries, and that would be an overcharge of VA benefits. Even if we receive an anonymous complaint of that because of the egregious nature, that is something that would generally, while not treated as a normal complaint, would cause us to take a look at that school, share that with our SAA partners, as well as federal law enforcement partners. And that's actually how a number of sort of high-profile prosecutions, federal prosecutions, have started out, is because of anonymous complaints.
Is there an educational process to the veteran who is using the benefit to look out for these types of things?
I don't think I understand the question.
So if I'm a veteran and I'm signing up for these classes or school, and I recognize myself that something is more expensive or there's something illegal, is there any kind of toolkit available to the veteran who's going out to apply for these classes of what is and is not legal and what their rights are?
No, sir, not that I'm aware of.
Yes, sir. 16 seconds.
I can tell you that in North Carolina, if we were to learn of such, that school would be immediately suspended and withdrawn. And in the catalogs for the schools, particularly truck driving schools, there should be a statement in there about the SAA and getting in touch with them if they have concerns.
The gentleman's time has expired. We're going to proceed to a second round of questioning because I know that you guys you need some more in-depth answers, as do I. So we're going to do that. The chair I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Garcia, again, thank you for answering so many of these questions. But we really have to talk about this error rate because I'm concerned about it. And we've been getting, the subcommittee and our staff have been getting complaints from VA employees about the extra workload of fixing errors in automated claims. And I got to do this, automated, air quotations. And I'm concerned about the government paying for claims that are not correctly automated. And I understand that the automated error rate is nearly 50%. Is that correct?
So I had 40%.
Okay, well, 40% error rate is not good. So I understand that the automated error rate is nearly 40%. Is that correct?
From reviews that I've seen, yes, sir.
Okay, and I understand that you commissioned and received a report that studies the automation in the RPOs. Is that correct?
As part of their review, yes, sir. We asked them to do that.
Very well. And understand that this is called the RPO report. Do you commit to providing the RPO report to the subcommittee by the end of this week?
Yes, sir. Be glad to do that.
Dang. Thanks, man. Yep. Mr. Westcott, it was really interesting. Can you elaborate on your testimony in reference to faith-based schools and their issues with the with the 1015 waivers for religious institutions?
Referring to the Title IV?
That is correct, sir. I mean, this is something that the general public needs to understand.
Yeah, exactly. Many of these schools just don't see the need to offer Title IV, nor do they want to go through the process of engaging with that, and they don't really want the federal oversight into their religious instruction. And these are, like I said, Reformed theological. We're not talking about schools in storefronts or church basements. We're talking about legitimate schools that are finding other sources to provide for their students and therefore see no reason to engage with Title IV.
So, I mean, just as a side note, my grandson goes to kindergarten in a church basement. Just throwing that out there. So those are valid too.
Yeah, that was in no way a
I know.
discredit.
I get you, man. Hey, do you think this is onerous? Are our veterans not able to attend religiously affiliated schools due to this onerous process, in your opinion?
Yeah, I really do. I mean, the bottom line is we had a school call in North Carolina and say, we'd like to get accredited. And we said, well, if you do, you're going to have to go for Title IV. They said, well, forget that. They were going to spend thousands to get accreditation. That is the wrong answer. We should encourage accreditation. And we have the mechanisms in place to make sure that those are quality programs.
Okay, so what we're doing is what we don't want to do.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's just not do that, man. Let's do great things. So
Totally agree.
Yeah, can you suggest a fix for this, please?
Well, yeah, my personal preference would be to do away with that requirement.
Okay.
But the second fix would be to find some realistic waiver that will allow those schools to be granted a waiver that doesn't involve applying for Title IV. I mean, as long as SAAs say these are quality institutions, let's trust the SAAs. We've got the results from the schools and drive on, but requiring them to apply for or have Title IV is just unnecessary.
Hey, thank you, sir. Mr. Garcia, can you noodle on this? You think about this, and that's with the stated intent of our purpose here, and your purpose really is to make sure that our veterans have the appropriate amount of educational benefits that they've earned. Can you sit down and can you guys talk about this, please?
Sir, but if the purpose is to provide support for veterans, if removing Title IV, though, removes financial aid that they could get, right? So if we have schools choosing, okay, I don't want to do Title IV, now you are limiting what veterans can get in terms of the educational goal pursuit, right? So I think we need to look at that as well. Look at the impact on the school, what's the impact on the student veteran? By removing Title IV opportunities, then you're driving veterans to private loans, they're more expensive, and that actually hurts the veteran. They need to look at it both sides.
And so, Mr. Garcia, I really don't believe that's what Mr. Westcott was saying, and I would just leave you with this. It's just not that cut and dry. So there is this is not a conundrum. It certainly is a quandary, and I'd like you to work on it with Mr. Westcott. And with that, my time has expired. The chair now recognizes Ranking Member Levin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to turn back to last Congress when we passed legislation to resolve issues that foreign-based students were having using their GI Bill. What we're hearing is that these students, some of them anyway, are still having delays, having their schools approved for the GI Bill. Can you provide us an update on where things stand ensuring foreign students can use their GI Bill?
Yes, sir. A couple of things. The foreign schools. One is that we're also allowing for enrollment manager paper-based for them, just like the OJT and apprenticeship. That helps there. Another improvement is around the direct payment. We actually came up with a solution where the schools were not getting timely electronic funds transfer payments because there was a requirement to use a U.S. bank account. We found a way to get around that recently, so that allows the payments to go through electronic means. And again, the enrollment part of accepting paper at least until October 31st, so we can reevaluate enrollment manager participation.
Appreciate that very much, and also to your earlier comments about taking responsibility, I really appreciate that you stood up and you said that you take responsibility. It's really critically important. We'll hear from our next panel as well about the work that they're trying to do to just make sure that we're all trying to share this burden to prevent bad actors. I think everybody wants the same thing here, so we're going to continue to hold you to account and appreciate the input of our next panel as well. With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Levin. The chair now recognizes my dear friend from the great state of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mervan's not here now, but did want to add just a kind of put a point on a point he was making earlier about the economics for schools. I would just argue if the schools are voting with their feet and not participating, then for whatever reasons, and there may be varied reasons, the juice isn't worth the squeeze for them. And schools are facing declining enrollments. They need students. They need every opportunity for revenue they can get. So if they're not doing it, that needs to be a significant warning to us. So as Mr. Garcia, as you had said in earlier things, we will find workarounds. We don't want to compromise our standards, but I do think we need to sit down and think really hard about how can we make this more palatable to the institutions, because we need that. We need them to serve the veterans. Mr. Westcott, we talked about the religious institutions, but whether it's a design, whether it's the way the system's designed, or if it's just misperception, sometimes the nonprofits and some of the online institutions feel like they're being unfairly targeted. Now, anybody that gets targeted is going to feel like they're being picked on, and I understand that. But do you think it either purposefully or inadvertently, the way the system's constructed, and actually this question will be for both of you because we have time, or is the system set up to unfairly penalize online and nonprofit institutions?
Well, and thank you for that question, Congressman. I would consider it inadvertently. I do have some memory of when this requirement was placed in the law, and the concern was primarily of those schools that lost Title IV would then lose their approval. Not that, that we would require them to have Title IV. At least that was my interpretation of what we were doing in the earlier days on this legislation. So I would hope, and I believe it's inadvertent, but it certainly needs to be addressed, because you're 100% correct.
So real quick, I think you hit on perception. So the term religious schools is not in the statutory language at all, right? It's all accredited programs have to participate under the statute. And we'd be willing to take a look at it, though.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin, and I want to thank everybody. The witnesses are now excused. And please stick around. I think you're going to get some good institutional knowledge from the next panel. So again, thank you very much. And we will adjourn shortly while we get readjusted here. Will the witnesses for the second panel please be seated? On our second panel, we'll be hearing from the following witnesses. Mrs. Ann Meehan, Assistant Vice President of Government Relations at the American Council of Education. Dr. Jandel Signor, President of the National Association of Veterans Programs Administrators. Mr. Will Hubbard, Vice President for Veterans and Military Policy at Veterans Education Success. And Mr. Joe Rasmussen, Director of the University of Wisconsin Veteran Services at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I want to welcome you here for this panel, and I'm going to ask you to stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have all answered in the affirmative. Mrs. Meehan, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your testimony.
Chairman Van Orden, Ranking Member Levin, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify. My name is Ann Meehan with the American Council on Education. ACE represents 1,700 public and private colleges and universities and related associations. Colleges and universities recognize the important role that VA plays in the oversight of education benefits. Congress has made significant investments in these programs, and it is critical that safeguards are in place to protect against waste, fraud, and abuse, both to protect taxpayer dollars and to ensure veterans are receiving a high-quality education. At the same time, in our effort to root out problems and identify bad actors, we must be mindful that we do not inadvertently create unnecessary burdens on institutions that are serving veterans well. Risk-based surveys, when done right, provide a valuable and efficient oversight tool that allows regulators to focus limited resources on the areas of greatest concern. While we commend VA for its efforts developing the survey, we believe VA's model reflects a misunderstanding of how risk-based surveys are intended to work. Moreover, we are concerned that in several respects, VA's effort may be inconsistent with congressional intent. In recent months, ACE has heard several concerns from institutions regarding VA's risk-based survey. In general, these concerns fall into 3 areas. 1, concerns related to the triggers VA uses to select an institution for a survey. 2, concerns about the information that must be provided once selected for a survey. And 3, concerns about information required as part of the financial soundness review. First, regarding the triggers, over the past year, VA has selected more than 1,200 institutions of higher learning and more than 600 colleges and universities for a risk-based survey. Given the large number of institutions selected, we question whether VA's model is sufficiently targeted to institutions posing a substantial risk of noncompliance. Many campuses report that they are unaware of the reason why they were selected for a risk-based survey. For colleges and universities who know why they were selected, the reason given is often limited and technical in nature, and not one under any reasonable standard that would be indicative of increased risk. For example, some campuses were selected based on a failure to satisfy VA's prior flawed interpretation of the 8515 rule, an interpretation which has subsequently been corrected through legislation. Some campuses were selected based on a single complaint. In one case, the complaint was decades old and had never been verified. In another case, the complaint was from a non-student. Some were selected based on a modest increase in the number of veterans enrolled in a program, which was common as we emerged from the pandemic. And finally, some campuses were selected due to nothing more than a standard tuition increase. None of these reasons are ones that suggest a heightened risk of noncompliance by the institution. I note that we did not hear from any institutions that were chosen for a risk-based survey based on one of the events listed in Section 3673E of the law. However, we strongly agree that any of those events should trigger a risk-based survey. Second, we have heard concerns about the breadth of the information required by VA's survey and the limited time given to respond. One large university reports providing tens of thousands of documents in response to VA's request. Coordinating this response across a university is a massive undertaking, requiring assistance from campus officials in multiple offices. While most offices are happy to help, others may not understand the immediacy or importance of this work, particularly when it requires them to drop other mission-critical work in order to comply. As one example of the breadth of the required information, campuses are required to provide copies of any complaint received by the institution over a 3-year period. Institutions are instructed to provide all complaints, even complaints about the dining hall. More problematic, institutions are required to allow the SAA to monitor a class in order to determine the quality of the instruction. While this requirement is well-intentioned, it misses the mark, particularly at a large research university, where it is viewed as an inappropriate intrusion into academic matters. Third, we have heard concerns about VA's required financial soundness review, which appears to confuse the financial audit information that for-profit institutions report with financial audit information that public and nonprofit institutions typically report. To summarize, we support risk-based surveys, and we believe they are an important oversight tool. However, we believe that VA's model needs further work to ensure it is meeting its intended purpose. We hope that Congress will help VA refocus its efforts on the institutions that pose a serious risk of noncompliance while shielding good institutions from an unnecessary compliance burden. We stand ready to assist in these efforts. Thank you. I'd be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Meehan. The written statement of Mrs. Meehan will be entered into the hearing record. Dr. Signor, I'm pronouncing that correct, aren't I? Signor, right. So Dr. Signor, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today representing the National Association of Veterans Program Administrators, or NAPA. My name is Dr. Jan Del Signor, a U.S. Air Force retired veteran, but today I'm here to speak to you as the NAPA president on behalf of the men and women who are conducting the daily operations of certifying and administering the GI Bill benefits. NAPA is the only national organization comprised of SEO, school certifying officials, and school administrators working to deliver educational opportunities for veterans since 1975. Our members have been the SEOs who are in the trenches with boots on the ground, serving student veterans daily while trying to maintain compliance. I am here to discuss two concerns: risk-based surveys and the impact of increased duties placed on the SEO. Our primary concern today is the risk-based survey, RBS, and the criteria the VA is using to select schools they deem as at risk. Schools welcome accountability and are proud to maintain compliance with reasonable regulation. However, there has been an unreasonable burden placed upon the institutions through an excess of well-intended oversight. NAPA conducted a survey of SEOs nationwide and discovered most of the schools selected for a risk-based survey were for minor or unclear reasons. The top reasons these schools were identified for an RBS are student complaints, unknown criteria, an increase in student population, or an unwarranted 8515 violation. There are examples nationwide of RBS being deployed against all types of institutions, including public and accredited schools. Several schools reported they received an RBS based on an old student complaint that was addressed by the institution and closed. Other schools reported they were identified for an RBS from a complaint that was never received by the institution and deemed as invalid by the VA. One school reported receiving complaints because of benefit processing errors by the VA, not the school, yet the school still had to respond and an RBS was triggered. Some institutions reported that they had no idea why they were identified for an RBS, as the state approving agency, SAA, did not or could not explain why this RBS was being conducted. Third top reason schools reported they were selected for an RBS was due to an increase in student population during the COVID recovery period when students were returning back to campus. The fourth top reason included schools with a 35% exemption criteria for 8515, as they had programs suspended by the VA during spring 22 with no veterans enrolled because of the calculations implemented by the VA. The VA introduced these new methods during the pandemic and caused many programs to be erroneously suspended nationwide. None of these situations confirmed a school was at risk to close, nor were they guilty of exploiting or misusing veterans' benefits. NAPA recommends correcting these measures by establishing an advisory council of higher education officials, the SAA, and the VA to develop a model using public data to identify criteria that would trigger an RBS. In the spirit of today's hearing, less is more. The actual key players should be developing the criteria that would meet the intent of Congress. NAPA respectfully requests outside agencies who have never worked in higher ed and have no understanding of daily operations of an institution not be involved, as this often leads to misleading advice, oftentimes from lack of experience. Our next concern involves the increased duties placed on SEOs. There have been several changes implemented by the VA on how to administer GI Bill benefits. This includes additional requirements for a catalog approval, less time to prepare for compliance reviews, and return of funding to the VA. Due to the insurmountable requirements for schools to obtain approval and maintain compliance requirements with limited time for preparation, institutions nationwide have withdrawn from administering the GI Bill because of the increased workload and regulatory demands. These schools include first responders, EMTs, police and fire academies, truck driving schools, and religious orders. This creates an economic disparity for the veteran when trying to find needed instructional resources but unable to use their GI Bill benefits for training. NAPA would like to see legislation that would give relief of the many burdensome tasks placed on accredited institutions and recodify Public Law 117-333 to allow the institution sufficient time to prepare for reviews and provide a reasonable response. Additional information can be found in our written testimony. I thank you, and I welcome your questions today.
Thank you, Dr. Del Signor.
Yes, sir.
The written testimony of Dr. Del Signor will be entered into the hearing record. Mr. Hubbard, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your testimony.
Chairman Van Orden, Ranking Member Levin, and members of the subcommittee, we thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony before the subcommittee today. Veterans Education Success is a nonprofit organization with the mission of advancing higher education success for veterans, service members, and military families, and protecting the integrity and promise of the GI Bill and other federal education programs. Drawing from our team's experience and direct interactions with student veterans, their families, and stakeholders, we submit our observations for the subcommittee's consideration. We would like to express our general gratitude to the leadership and staff in education service at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Their collaboration on many of these issues and commitment to serving veterans are worth highlighting specifically. However, we also feel it is important to highlight areas where we believe there is room for improvement. Since the very first GI Bill in 1944, there have been scammers looking to take advantage of veterans' benefits. In 1952, a House Select Committee led by Congressman Olin Teague of Texas exposed the trend of predatory schools targeting veterans for their GI Bill benefits. And in 2012, the Senate Help Committee issued an alarming report that found widespread deception by predatory schools. Given the issues of the past decade and prior, including numerous sudden collapses of risky schools, Congress passed several significant bipartisan laws. These laws aim to combat fraud by bad actor schools and programs, ultimately protecting veterans' benefits and taxpayer dollars. This includes the Isaacson-Roe Act, the authorizing legislation for risk-based surveys. Risk-based surveys are important both for protecting veterans and taxpayers and for ensuring the efficient use of the limited resources of VA and the state approving agencies. However, our testimony, along with our colleagues at this table, highlights a fundamental point. VA's current approach does not match the clear direction of Congress. As our colleagues at ACE point out, VA is currently selecting an overly broad set of schools for risk-based surveys in contrast with what the statute had contemplated. Specifically, Congress established 5 triggers for risk-based surveys. Yet, VA continues to launch risk-based surveys even in the absence of one of these 5 triggers. As the University of Wisconsin rightly notes, increased enrollment is not a mandatory trigger, but instead listed as in another section of the statute, which lays out the issues that the SA should consider during a review, if and only if such a review has been triggered by one of the 5 mandatory issues. We also strongly support NASA's comments that the VA should follow the pilot model and implement the database, which would result in a dramatically smaller number of schools being selected for review. In addition to risk-based surveys, persistent red tape and VA statutory misinterpretations continue to hinder the potential of veterans' education benefits. As outlined in our written testimony, this includes, first, school closures and GI Bill restoration policies, where VA continues failing to implement unambiguous statutory guidelines, even after the committee clarified them in the Vets Credit Act. Second, a lack of necessary transparency on the GI Bill comparison tool. This harms veterans who should rightfully expect transparent information in their school search process. And third, VA's refusal to exempt Marines under the excess leave program from a newly revised interpretation, despite the legal obligation to do so. We believe there is a pattern to these issues. Time and time again, this body passes thoughtful, well-positioned legislation based on stakeholder input with the intention of supporting veterans and their goals. Then, VA executes a surprising interpretation unsupported by law and inconsistent with congressional intent. Couple that with some schools under-resourcing the appropriate offices on campus, and the result is that the laws put in place to safeguard hard-earned benefits are not being properly executed. We hope to continue our efforts in collaboration with VA and the committed people here in this room who simply want to do right by veterans, for they and their families should be VA's one and only focus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. The written statement of Mr. Hubbard will be entered into the hearing record. Mr. Rasmussen, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Van Orden, Ranking Member Levin, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation. I'm excited to share my testimony before the subcommittee on behalf of the veteran and military-connected students at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and my staff that serves them. I've also consulted with my peers across the state of Wisconsin as well as in the Big Ten. Hearing the conversation thus far, I can tell I'm in good company. While I might be critical of this process, it's only because I care. I feel like we're all on the same team, Team Veteran. I'd briefly like to share my background as I hope it provides perspective. I get to serve as the Director of Veteran Services at the University of Wisconsin. I'm also the grandson of 2 World War II veterans, the son of a Vietnam veteran, and I proudly served 4 years in the Marine Corps right out of high school. The GI Bill was personally important to me. It helped me pay rent, buy food, and a little further down the road, it even helped pay for my father's gravestone. This program matters. I'd like to introduce one of our student veterans, Eddie. Eddie's a senior who's studying finance. He grew up in Florida, served in California, and moved to Wisconsin sight unseen. He's a first-generation college student, a first-generation veteran, and a first-generation American. When I think about this process, I think about how it impacts Eddie. Today, my highlights are that risk-based surveys is a good idea, but we need more collaboration. In general, there's too much red tape, and the systems need to be updated. Students like Eddie need to be centered in the conversation, and that we at the schools want to be partners. We need more of me's and my colleagues in the room when we're talking about creating new policies, and when we can't be there, we need trusted partners like my colleagues at the table and folks like the Association of Public Land Grant Universities, or APLU. Many of our student veterans, like Eddie, had a difficult time adjusting to campus. UW-Madison research tells us that too many of our veterans are not making connections to their college peers or university staff or faculty. That same research shows that students who do connect with veteran service staff specifically rank higher in metrics we know that lead to student success. College veteran service staff have earned the trust of these students, but that trust is eroding as we focus more time on bureaucracy and less time on direct student support. Enrollment manager is a great point. There's a lot that could have happened to make the administration on the school side much less time-consuming. However, VA chose to build the process close hold, and there was very little in the way of partnering. Unfortunately, today, entering information into the new system takes longer than the old system, and we find too many errors that are leading to students being underpaid, paid late, and in some cases, not receiving payments at all. There are also longer-standing issues with the VA rules that they outline in their handbook. One such rule says that undeclared juniors cannot use the GI Bill. This simply doesn't work. Most students at UW are transfer students, and money come in close or already at the junior mark. Competitive programs such as engineering, computer sciences, and nursing require on-campus prerequisites. Because these rules run counter to how things work on campus, many student veterans cannot enjoy the same academic college experience as their non-veteran peers. Each breakdown in this system leads to worse outcomes for our student veterans. And as this process gets more burdensome, we see more veterans driven from our high-quality schools. I'm not naive enough to think we can solve every issue overnight, but we're certainly not moving in the right direction with this status quo. It's time for VA Education Services to find real, meaningful ways to bring education partners into the fold. In my experience, GI Bill benefits are often the first place veterans interact with the VA. I often refer to the GI Bill and our schools as the front door to the VA. The GI Bill is a fundamental promise, something that many veterans are proud to earn and proud to use, and we owe it to them to create a system that honors that service and earns their trust. I invite you to come to campus and meet Eddie and our other student veterans, and I thank you for the time today, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Rasmussen. Mr. Rasmussen's written testimony will be entered into the record. I'm going to reserve my questions till the end, and so now I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Levin, for 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman, and I told him I'm ready to go to Wisconsin, so look forward to that. I want to make sure that we, just as we held VA to account in the first panel, that we make sure to talk to you and to schools, and that we understand we all have a responsibility to make this work. I'll start with Ms. Del Senor. I'm empathetic to the struggles and the issues that schools are facing. VA can absolutely improve their processes. I think we made that clear. Shouldn't some of the shared burden to prevent bad actors also fall on schools?
I thank you for the question, sir. The bad actors, from my understanding, that in the past historically have not been accredited institutions. Many of the current risk-based surveys are being applied and focused on accredited schools instead of the unaccredited schools. So it is going to take a partnership moving forward to make sure that these bad actors are not doing what they have done in the past. And we can definitely provide the quality education to our veterans so they can have a successful academic goal and be able to transition effectively and satisfactorily back into the civilian sector.
We share that objective. I think the key here is taking the time to have enough staff to do the preventative work, making sure that the burden that is being caused by VA regulations is being met by enough people on the ground at your campuses. Could you tell us actually, I'll turn to Mr. Rasmussen for this. Could you tell us the ratio of veteran program administrator staff that you have compared to the number of student veterans that you serve, and what you think that rough ratio should be?
Certainly. So at the University of Wisconsin, we have 4 full-time positions in my office, including myself. 2 of those folks, 100% of their time is dedicated to making sure that the GI Bill works. I'd also add to this that we don't live in a vacuum. This is obviously a conversation about federal benefits, but many states, like Wisconsin, also offer very high-quality state programs. So those numbers are larger than what they look like just when we examine these numbers. I agree. I heard earlier, 1 to 100, 1 to 200. I think those are very great goals to work towards. We're not quite at 1 to 200, but we're pretty close. I will tell you, as a former student veteran, as somebody who works with students, I wish that number would be higher. I wish that we would have enough time to give every single student the time that they've earned.
And it's true that student veterans using the GI Bill are bringing full in-state tuition to the table, reducing the amount of aid that schools need to provide, correct?
So, if I understand the question correctly, it's that the GI Bill then is taking the place of other school aid. I can tell you in Wisconsin, and specifically at UW-Madison, we have Bucky's Tuition Promise. Student veterans who qualify for Bucky's Tuition Promise get 100% of that promise plus their GI Bill. So we do not change their package based on post 9/11 GI Bill one bit. I can't speak for other institutions, but we're lucky enough to be able to provide everything that we would give a non-GI Bill student to
But
our
fair to say that having more student veterans is good in every conceivable way for your campus and for every campus, and therefore it would make sense to do the preventative work to make sure you've got enough support staff to deal with whatever VA throws your way. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I can't agree more that we need to be able to rise and meet the needs.
Appreciate that. With time I have left, Mr. Hubbard, I think you knocked it out of the park with your comments, particularly at the end where you talked about that balance. We try to do the best we can in this subcommittee and throughout the House Veterans Affairs Committee to pass well-intentioned legislation to try to improve the lives of our veterans and improve their educational opportunities. And we often don't agree with how specifics are implemented at VA. Sometimes they do a fantastic job, on the other hand, but it is all a balancing act. So what do you think the balance is between preventing bad actors from accessing GI Bill funds and making it easy and enticing for good actors to serve veterans?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Ranking Member. I think it's an imperative one. I recognize the time has expired. I can answer perhaps at a later point or in writing.
We'll come back to you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Franklin from the great state of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Hubbard, I'd give you the time now to answer that because that's something I'm very interested in hearing about.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. So in terms of incentivizing good schools to bring in student veterans, I think there's one important factor to consider, which is these are literally the best students in higher education today. They are non-traditional students. They often have families. They're a little bit older typically, but they have world experience and they make the best alumni. They offer the most to the classroom and they offer the most by way of packaging. These are fully packaged students that come with full funding. I think any school would be lucky to have student veterans in their classroom, and that's really what they should recognize.
Thank you. Actually, I read all your testimony. There's a lot of great ideas and suggestions in there. I do recognize, too, as the ranking member had said, that the reason that a lot of this oversight is in place now is because there were a lot of institutions, some rogue actors out there that didn't do the right thing. So there is a need, and we got to strike a balance. Mr. Garcia had said earlier, we had talked about ways that we could improve this process. I think, in looking at this hearing today, according to staff, you all were advised of this about a month ago. So you've had a month to prepare for this. I would submit that the four of you and the institutions you represent could get together with the representatives of the VA, and in 30 days, you could probably fix a lot of these problems we're talking about, or at least have a good roadmap to move ahead. But just in the brief time, if you could each take about 30 seconds, if you had your way for a day, what would be the first and fastest things you would fix? And starting with you, Ms. Meehan.
Process to sort of understand the differences between, we have over 4,000 colleges and universities that are degree-granting institutions, and it's a very diverse group, and so one size doesn't always fit all. I think that's one of the things where risk-based surveys, by thinking about ways that we want to make sure we're identifying the greatest risk and figuring out what those factors are so that we are not putting a compliance burden on the other schools. There's just such a variety when you think about the types of programs that VA provides. They're not all college degree programs. Some of them are training programs. So I think that's a challenge that VA has in a lot of areas, trying to make sure that we have sort of as much of an approach that is appropriate for what the different types of institutions and their challenges are.
Thank you. Dr. Del Signore.
And thank you for the question, sir. Yes, I think communication is key factor moving forward, looking at quality improvement. There's always processes in place that could be improved, whether from the institution or from the VA or the SAA. So coming together as a team, definitely working together to look at those triggers that may or may not be a true risk assessment of that institution based on the institution type, with their accreditation factors involved, but looking at all the moving parts and coming up with a solid database for the VA to use.
Well, thank you. I do want to hear from the others, but you all have given a lot of very, very specific things that are more tangible than just we need to communicate better. I mean, there's a lot of specific things in your testimony. Mr. Hubbard.
Thank you for the question. In our written testimony, we identify for every issue that has come up an executive branch solution. I think all of these issues on the table today could be solved at the executive level. We believe it ultimately comes down to following the letter of the law. We believe the statute is clear and unambiguous and should simply be followed as stated.
Well, if it's clear and unambiguous, I don't know that the solution for fixing laws is more laws, but your point's noted. And Mr. Rasmussen.
I hate to sound like a broken record, but it is communication. Earlier, I heard Mr. Westcott say that NAVPA is a partner, but I didn't hear our colleagues at the VA mention schools as they talk about and think about this process. I would make there be groups. Dr. Jan mentioned a committee, ways in which information from people like myself is inserted into the process before it happens and not after it happens, and then we have to clean up the mess.
All right, thank you. And I would like to note that you all had today far more time to prepare for this hearing than the institutions that you're saddling with these risk-based surveys that in many cases are having to provide tens of thousands of documents. It's not fair, and I can fully understand why a lot of them aren't wanting to participate. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. You'll back.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin. The chair now recognizes my great friend, Mr. McGarvey from Kentucky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all so much for being here. It's good to see you again, Mr. Hubbard, and thanks to all of you for the work you do. One of the most important things to keep in mind while having this discussion today is to highlight what we're seeing on the ground and what's actually happening in the implementation and the administration of these benefits. So I wanted to focus on the school certifying officials and their role. Mr. Rasmussen, I'm particularly interested to hear your perspective as someone in an educational entity overseeing GI Bill education benefits. So, Mr. Rasmussen, how hard is it for you to hire and train up someone to work in your office as a school certifying official or GI benefits bill administrator? What are we seeing right now in terms of staffing?
I very much appreciate this question. And let's actually start with the school certifying official role. It's not something that naturally exists in higher education. The duties that a school certifying official does probably overlaps 4 or 5 different offices. So it's extremely complex and it's very specific. It's rare that we could hire somebody who has worked in administration or VA or any other entity and they can immediately be a productive school certifying official. The most recent hire I had, retired lieutenant colonel, took him about a year from when he started until I would say that he can operate independently, not asking a bunch of questions. It's really complicated, and it's, to get to your question, hard to hire good school certifying officials, and even harder to train them.
And I don't know if there is an answer to this next question, but it's just so it's the question sincere, right? Is there anything we can do to help in that?
I do think about, and again, communication. There was a communication that went out several years ago from VA telling schools what an expected ratio of school certifying officials were. That went to a bunch of my staff. So a bunch of school certifying officials got a note saying, we need more of you all. I think if it was a serious act, then that sort of thing should have been communicated in a way where our college presidents and chancellors can hear how important these roles are and they can take action. I put every year into my budget a request for more school certifying officials, but what I need is direction from the top.
I appreciate that. And, you know, I liked what you said when you said we're all on Team Veteran. I think everybody on this committee is on Team Veteran. And one of the reasons we get along is to help our veterans get what they have earned and what they deserve. If you do think of anything, any of you all think of anything we can do to help in that regard, whether it is a legislative action or even it's whether using the platforms of our offices and letters and communication with people in charge to let them know how seriously we take that, you know, please do that. Ms. McCann?
Excuse me. I was going to mention in my testimony, I think that a common repository for all of the training materials on the VA's website would be really helpful because school certifying officials, it is a relatively junior position on many campuses. The changeover rate may be high, and they need a quick way to come up to speed and have all those resources available for them. So that's one thing you might consider.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Hubbard, just a similar question to you. We know veterans education success highlighted in your testimony that how schools are struggling to maintain enough school certifying officials. What do you see as some of the main barriers here and are seeing in terms of staffing? Like, what more can we do? What thoughts do you have on this issue?
Thank you for the question, sir. First off, I want to offer my congratulations on the recent passage of your Isaacson-Rowe Oversight Act. That's a huge win and obviously something that you have championed and led on for good reasons. One thing that I think is important is that schools are paying attention to the requirements of the administrative burdens that are associated with compliance and providing that relevant support. As we talked about earlier, the GI Bill is the most generous benefit out there when it comes to education, both providing for tuition and fees, but also housing. There's literally nothing in higher ed that's more generous, and so it's important that schools devote the appropriate resources to make sure that folks like our friends at University of Wisconsin on the ground doing the real work are getting the right support staff.
Cool, thank you. And just one last question in the very short remaining time. Do you guys have an idea of what you think the ideal ratio is? Please.
I believe VA recommends 1 to 125, but I certainly defer to my colleagues.
Currently, sir, in the SEO handbook, it's 1 to 200. It would be nice to have 1 to 100. It is a very, Chapter 33 is a very complicated process, so any help would be greatly appreciated.
Appreciate that, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGarvey. And the chair now recognizes my friend from the great state of Arizona, Mr. Subcommittee.
Thank you, Chairman Van Orden, for giving me the time, but also for holding this important hearing. And thank you to the witnesses here today that are here today to help us, inform us, and to better understand how these risk-based surveys are utilized and how the subcommittee can look into streamlining the steps for universities, for colleges, and for veterans that are utilizing the GI Bill benefits. I represent Tucson, Arizona. That's in that area, which includes the University of Arizona. As a University of Arizona alum, bear down. I know that the important work that the U of A does in providing students the tools for success, including with student veterans. Actually, earlier last month, I visited the U of A, it was this month actually, and I visited the U of A and I toured their Veterans Education and Transition Services Center. I was very impressed by their work there, I learned about the important work they do in supporting veteran students, especially since the center is staffed by veterans and that are students at the U of A that have transitioned out of the military to the U of A. So the university has over 5,000 military-connected students with about 2,300 veterans in active duty, National Guard or reserves, and these numbers consistently increase every single year. I'm proud of the support that they are providing to student veterans, but I also know we can do more, and that's where my question leads into Mr. Rasmussen. What type of factors do you believe should trigger a risk-based survey? And do you feel that the current risk-based surveys are focused on the right factors?
Thank you for the question. I think risk-based survey, and I said in my testimony, the idea is solid, right? That there is limited amount of resources and that we need to focus those resources in the right place. I don't know that I have the best answer on exactly which factors. I think the factors need to be informed by people on the ground. I think that when we have prescriptive factors that come down from a central office here in Washington, and it goes out to the states, and it's you must visit these schools, that needs to be also mixed with somebody in a state education capacity who can put real-world context to whatever factors those are. Some rapid increases, they can be easily explained by many different factors. I said in my written testimony, rapid increase could be because a bunch of post 9/11 veterans now have kids who are college age, and also, thanks to Congress, those children get to get in-state tuition rates at public schools. So I think instead of giving you good answers, because I'm not the guy who has the best answers on what should be risky, and I'm also not at a school that is risky, I would say that they need to be informed by professionals.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Then Dr. Delsignor, did I pronounce that correctly? Okay, good. What are the biggest concerns schools have about risk-based surveys and bureaucratic red tape, and how can we help solve them?
Thank you for the question, sir. So the survey that NAPA did to SEOs nationwide, the two biggest reasons that we received were student complaints that were normally old and closed, addressed, taken care of, or not valid, or they were not even sent to the institution prior to the risk-based survey, so the institution had the opportunity to read through and understand what the issue was prior to the risk-based survey happening. The second largest reason was the school was never told by the state approving agency as to what triggered the risk-based survey. So they were just, said, hey, you guys have a risk-based survey, give us all this information, but we don't know, we can't tell you why.
How much time do you feel is needed for a risk-based survey inspection to be conducted appropriately?
Again, thank you for that question, sir. Having gone through that experience myself, it's probably 30 days or more for the institution to prepare. In our testimony, we did say it takes a multitude of different departments to pull together this information. It's not something that's normally hands-on. For example, the school is required to provide the last 2 years of all advertising to include all your social media. So if you're a public institution and you have football season right now, those are all your football posts that have to be provided for the SAA. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. You back, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Subcommittee. The chair now recognizes the fact that my microphone's not up here. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Hey, before I get going here, Mr. Hubbard and Mr. Rasmussen, I want to thank you very much for the Herculean effort of getting yourself here from South Carolina after you recovered your lost F-35. That was amazing. Thank you for getting up here. Yeah, I just said that.
I think I'd get in trouble if I commented on that. So
That's right. Let's work on that one later. Hey, the subcommittee, we've heard a lot about the enrollment manager from the VA in the last few months. Thank you, Mr. Subcommittee. However, we've not been able to hear from you guys. So what has your experience been with the enrollment manager and to a greater extent with the digital GI bill? I'm going to throw that out to you, Mr. Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. Van Orden. I really appreciate the question, and I think that's why I'm here, right? I'm representing the real on-the-ground experience. I said in my testimony, it takes longer. It takes longer to use. It's not accurate. The data that we see in that system isn't the truth. It's very one way we submit things. And then there's things that happen outside of the system. So the system isn't adequate in capturing what we need it to capture in order for the process to work. So then we get secondary emails from processors at regional processing offices almost daily asking for questions about what an individual certification means. And then because it's tied into this ID me or whatever, and my staff being veterans themselves, this last weekend, one of my staff members got an email from the VA processing office to his personal Gmail that contained data about a student enrollment. So it's not working anywhere.
Okay, so but I'm going to ask you all real quick. Can we all agree, or do you agree that there is the potential for, and more likely than not, fraud involved in this education system because of its size? Mr. Rasmussen?
I'm sorry, sir, I didn't hear the last part of your question.
Because of the size and scope of these programs, you agree that fraud does exist?
Oh, absolutely, fraud
Robert?
exists.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Dr. Delsignor?
There's definitely opportunity there.
Okay, and Mrs. Mead?
Agreed.
Okay, good. And so we can clearly determine that a system, some type of system has to be in place, right? Okay, so let's figure out how to do it better. What I get from your written testimony, which I've read, and it's awesome talking to you guys, is what I have heard is that it seems to be a huge lack of communication between your institutions and the Veterans Affairs Administration. Did I characterize that accurately? It seems like you're just not talking. Do you have a way, Mr. Rasmussen? Do you have a formal way to get a hold of the VA when you need to?
I'm noisy enough that I've found a couple of contacts, but that's not common for my peers at other schools that are, not quite as well resourced.
How often do you talk to your Big Ten colleagues?
Well, almost daily in email. We meet on Zoom calls at least once a month, but more frequently.
How often do you and your Big Ten colleagues speak to the Veterans Affairs Administration?
Almost never.
Okay.
There's no avenue in.
Mr. Garcia, I've got a huge ask for you, man. Will you give Mr. Rasmussen your personal cell phone number? Is that your personal or is that the office? Please do. And that's a big ask because he is from Madison, so you may get some inappropriate phone calls about 2 in the morning. So here's what we want to do. We want to solve this problem. Do you have something you'd like to say, ma'am? Please do.
Yes, if I could, sir. At one point, the schools had access to our education liaison representatives, the ELRs. We don't anymore. During the pandemic, emails went out unanswered right from the VA, and those were our go-to people to receive those answers. We need our ELRs back. I know there's been a huge shortage. I know the VA has filled those, for the most part, that shortage. But they're not ready to basically hit the ground running. They need to be trained to answer and help support the SEO in administering the GI Bill, because as I said earlier, it is a very complicated process. And any help you could give would be greatly appreciated.
Okay, I found from personal experience that oftentimes we ascribe the worst intentions to people simply because we don't know what they're thinking. And I think there's a case of that, because I talk to Mr. Garcia on the regular, and his intentions are pure. They really are. And it's just, the bureaucracy is so huge. So you're getting his number, and you're going to talk. And you got a group of Big Ten dudes together with, 50-pound brains and whatnot to think about this stuff all the time. I want you to share your lessons learned with this cat. And Mr. Garcia, I'd love it if you'd listen to him. This is awesome. My time has expired. Kate always wants one more. Okie doke. So let's get Mr. Levin. I now recognize Ranking Member Levin for his closing statement.
I want to thank the chairman for helping to improve the communication between VA and our second panel. I think it's so critically important that it just doesn't stop there, but that each of you take the time and the effort to get to know one another. You're all here. You might as well stick around, get to know one another. I think that the 8 risk factors in Isaacson Row aren't the problem, but I do think that they really should only be triggered when schools have grossly failed at one of the standards in law. And I would hope that you would understand the intent at the time was not that we have this overwhelming administrative burden on these schools, but that we reserve, for bad actors and try to make the best judgment that we can on that basis. Just the same, I would hope that the schools would do more to try to hire folks and to try to hit the 1 in 100. When I think about the revenue that, forget about all the things that Mr. Hubbard said and that I agree with about all the reasons why you want more student veterans on your campuses. They are the best of the best. It's also a tremendous amount of revenue for your schools. And that was the point that we were trying to make earlier. And to that end, when you consider the amount that you're actually going to be spending, that incremental cost of having 1 more person on your staff or 2 more people on your staff, who can handle these matters, regardless of how difficult, to Mr. McGarvey's question, how difficult it might be to find qualified people. Even just a couple more people would hopefully go a long way towards addressing the issue, and really would be a drop in the bucket when you consider the amount of revenue that we're talking here to a school like the University of Wisconsin or anywhere else. So I think there's plenty of criticism that can be levied. I don't think that's helpful or useful. I think to my friend the chairman's point, communication is really useful. So I hope that you'll take this opportunity. I hope VA will take the opportunity. I hope the schools will take the opportunity. And I hope you'll continue to communicate and that we get this right because our student veterans are caught in the middle. So with that, I'll yield back to my friend the chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Levin. Gosh, you know what? I actually, this is such a weird feeling because I think we've actually moved the ball down the field today in Congress. That's shocking to me personally. It is, man. I'm just talk to each other, and please, try not to ascribe negative intentions to another party unless they prove it, man. Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. We are here to get, if you've noticed, we are a single unit moving forward. And that's not changing anytime soon. So, Mr. Garcia, if you have issues with these cats, I want you to come talk to us. Everybody at this panel, you have issues with that dude, get a hold of us, and we will respond. The demand signal comes from you, okay? That's why we're here. So I want to thank you all for coming. Your testimony is very valuable. And all the members that participated today, I believe that this hearing has helped illuminate some issues, and we're moving forward with the purpose. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to review and extend their remarks and include any extraneous materials without objection. So ordered. This hearing is adjourned.